I'm your host, Dr. Alexis Hazen. I'm a board-certified plastic surgeon who specializes in breast surgery and gender-affirming surgery and cosmetic surgery. I've been practicing in New York City for over 20 years and continue to learn and educate as an associate professor at NYU Langone. Please join me in our mission to discover Zen. Welcome to the Dr. Zen podcast. I'm so happy to have you here, Rachel Paletsky Ash, who is a CEO and entrepreneur in the wellness arena. You've been in that field for many years. You started out working with your husband, Dr. Ash.
Yes.
And you guys started a company, which we're going to talk about a little bit. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's lovely to see you.
Yeah, I always enjoy our time together.
What I wanted to start out with is actually, some tragedies that happened to you. You lost three really important people suddenly, your mother, your father, and your husband. And we've talked offline about this and how the grieving process and what you sort of turned that into. And you turned that into a lot of creative energy and a lot of positive impact on the community. So I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the deaths and then, your process, and we'll turn that into a conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all lose somebody, and like we.
Oh.
Because, I think you ladies get what I'm saying. There we go.
It's a little too disco for you?
Well, for the topic, it's just like, so everyone's dead.
Woohoo! But Sister Rose is dead. We're all gonna die.
How it affected you was profound, but you also turned all that grief into actually positive, creative energy. So I wanted you to speak a little bit first about the deaths and then how you managed that and how you turned that into some positive creations.
Sure. Yeah. It's one of those things that I never expected tragedy to be such a prominent part of my life. I lost both of my parents in my 20s, and then my husband when I was 35.
Wow.
My mother, when I was 22, was diagnosed with a terminal cancer, with ovarian cancer. I was in college, She passed a month before I graduated. Oh. But she really made the experience of dying something that it was a really beautiful, transcendent experience. And I think she set the tone to be able to, for me to be resilient. It was during a time where my friends were going out, we were in college, we were having fun, and instead I was home taking care of my mom. Or my priorities shifted. And you saw how precious life was. And I think the best advice she gave to me, I remember writing her a letter saying, "Mom, I miss you already." And I would give her cards and write, "I miss you already." And I can't imagine my life without you. And I wrote a whole letter to her just saying, here's what the rest of my life is going to look like, because I didn't want her to miss out. And I also wanted, as 20 to 22 years old, wanted her approval and just making sure that I would make her proud and that everything was going to be okay. Because I think the uncertainty of death and the uncertainty of what we move forward into and the not knowing or being having the physical space, whether it's your home or just the places that you go in life on a daily basis, but not having that physical person and their energy there's a huge void. So I wrote these letters to my mother while she was alive, and my mom sort of looked them over and she said, "I don't care." She just said, "All I want you to do is be happy. Just be happy and be kind." And I was like, okay. And then we talked about life after death. So we were not a religious family, but I'd say a spiritual family. And, my mother said, I said, I want you to give me signs, but don't turn the TV on at 2:00 in the morning. Don't freak me out.
Yeah,
I don't want
poltergeist.
Right. I don't want to be freaked out. I just want something loving to know that you're there. So she said, every night before you go to bed, I'll give you a kiss. So I just want you to know, like, you'll be okay. I won't be with you, but you'll be okay. And it was hard. And I remember when she passed, it was just a tiny body with a big spirit in a small hospital room, surrounded by her parents and her sisters and myself and my brother. And it was this beautiful experience. And I didn't realize until after the fact how sad it was, because there was a finality to it that I wasn't processing. It's people are there for you right away.
Yeah.
And then it's sort of the 3 months out, 5 months out, 6 months out, things feel really lonely. And at 22 years old, it's like you still really need your mother.
Yeah.
In so many spaces. So I felt like there were a lot of decisions maybe I made that if my mom had been around, I realized that my life would have been completely different.
Mm-hmm.
I can't regret anything that I did, but you make the best decisions in the moment. And I just kind of kept in the back of my head, as long as you're happy and as long as you're kind, and there's so much more to life. And I was walking around and just being with my friends and had this feeling or this knowing that, hey, I'm tapped into something that my friends weren't necessarily tapped into. And it was because of the grief and it was because of the loss. But I felt a knowing. And that's the only thing I can say. I felt like I knew things that I didn't necessarily know before. I felt protected. I felt belief. I felt it could be really hard and lonely at times, because when my mother died, I felt this huge loss of unconditional love. Even though I loved my father and I loved my family, it was that disconnection from the divine feminine. And when anybody, whether it's your parents or a child dies, it's a cellular loss where your cells come from their cells, and there's a whole sort of that cellular spiritual aspect of it too, where you're mourning on this really deep level, and it's held in your cellular memory. So I found that no matter how much I talked about it, it was still sitting inside of me. So it was navigating that territory, feeling lost in my early 20s. And when I met my husband, so my mother passed when I was 22. I met my husband when I was 26. And when I met him, it was one of those things where we were connected through my mom's oncologist. So
my goodness.
Yes.
Wow.
So we didn't realize that.
Yeah, tell me how you recognized that was the connection. Because the other thing that struck me is you said that you had unconditional love, and that is what parents are supposed to do.
Yeah.
But it is still rare.
It is
not common, actually, to experience unconditional love. So what a beautiful thing that you had that. And I'm sure that did inform your ability to move through this and with the grace that you did.
Yeah, I mean, I felt really lucky to have that baseline. But I also, coming out of it, just truthfully, maybe it was just like age and an experience. I didn't feel fully supported, but I felt like I know stuff and I've got to take what I know, and you just keep moving forward. I remember the day after my mother died, going to my grandmother's house for breakfast and just being like, I'm not hungry. And she was like, oh no, we're not going to do this. And I'm like, okay then. So there was like that sense of you've got to push through. Mm-hmm. Like you don't waste time crying. Like it is what it is. And you also have to deal with it. So I had tough love aspect too, where I was like, can we, I feel like taking a day off. And I wasn't necessarily afforded that, but down the line, I appreciated it. But there's, you got to have the balance and do what feels right for you. But my husband he was married before me and lost his wife to ovarian cancer. And it turns out that my mother and his wife had the same doctor, who's a dear friend. A cousin of mine was his head resident.
Oh, wow.
And my husband and I,
such a coincidence.
Yeah, we met at a party in the Hamptons and somehow realized that these paths crossed in our life, and also realized that I was actually probably with my mother in the same building that my husband worked at the same time, and we could have passed and never even realized if we could rewind time and see what actually was happening or occurring, or I thought stuff like that I find so fascinating. So my husband and I we were together for 3 years before my father passed away in an accident. So that was completely unexpected. I was in Paris at the time for work, and my brother's wife was pregnant, and their first baby was due that day. And I remember getting some phone calls and thinking like, oh, like, the baby must be born. And just listening to a voicemail, and I said, oh, something happened. And I figured either something happened to my sister-in-law or the baby. And I called my cousin, and she said, you've got to come home. Your dad was in an accident, and it's not good. And from the time I got that call to the time he passed was only an hour. And I remember thinking like, hey, like, God wouldn't do this to me. And I'm like, I'm not so much a more spiritual person than a religious person, but I was just like, whatever it was, God wouldn't take away both my parents. Like, I still need my dad. I still need
26?
this. I was 29 at the time, so right on my Saturn return. But when he passed, I knew that moment because I felt complete unconditional love. And I just said, okay, like, I completely surrender. And if I backtrack a little bit on that, a month before my father's accident, I was doing a meditation actually with Gabby Bernstein, and we were at her, I think it might have been right before her book came out, and we were at a studio she had downtown in New York, and she channeled my family. She channeled my grandfather, and I remember calling my dad when I left that session and saying, hey, I think I had tears in my eyes, like, let me give you the details of what just happened. Like, somebody came in and channeled our family and was saying stuff that you wouldn't know unless you knew my family, and this about Grant, my father's father, and some other stuff. And my dad's response to me was, I'm so happy you had that experience, because no matter what, we're connected. Oh. And I feel like on some level, and I never saw my dad after that, but I feel like on some level that was my superconscious and his superconscious giving permission to leave. So I'd say, like, at that point, like, when truth is stranger than fiction, and I want to believe everything that's that this world is very what you see is what you get, and really those experiences led me to believe that sometimes there's things that are real whether we believe them or not, and that we are way more intangible beings than we are tangible beings. And I would say that so much of what occurred with these deaths, they gave me more belief and more hope, and that there was a part of it where you need to grieve and you need to take the time to do that. But I also became hyper-focused on purpose, and hyper-focused on whether this world is real or not, or whether whatever I can create in this world has to be to make it a better place, or to put purpose in front of me, to be kind, to be happy, to put good out into the world, and to speak up. We have such a limited time, and it's important to make that time meaningful, and it's important to make that time happy, and it's important to bring joy. Because at the end of the day, we don't get that time back, and at the end of the day, nothing else really matters than the people that we love. And I realized too, just even with my mother, you can't tell somebody you love them enough. So that's like the last thing I could say to anybody. I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. And I couldn't say it enough. And it was but I realized I can't say it enough to anybody.
No, I think that's true. And I think it doesn't serve a purpose being unsaid.
Agreed.
It really, you've got to say the things, because people are not all intuits, and they don't know your feelings, and it's really important to express those things. Especially, you mentioned that you felt unconditional love from your mother. Yeah. Especially children. I mean, children really need to hear these loving, kind words. It's so important for their development and growth. But you did grieve, and you mentioned, how important it is to grieve, and I agree. We can't just move on from terrible things and just, say it's fine and muscle through. I mean, a lot of us do, and I think it leads to a lot of issues and problems down the road. So how did you grieve, and what did that look like?
Yeah, so each experience was different.
Yeah.
I didn't, I think talk therapy is wonderful. Mm-hmm. I didn't necessarily respond to it because I just felt like in my solar plexus, it was such this deep feeling of loss. I couldn't verbalize it, and maybe speaking wasn't my best outlet either. But I never felt like I could get out, that I could express the depth of pain, the depth of suffering.
I think that makes sense. It's hard to put
Yeah.
into words
And I
things that
ended
are
up-
so profound.
Yeah. Yeah. And I ended up working with a handful of healers. I did energy work. I did things like Reiki, network chiropractor. I found myself sleeping on the couch of a grandmother, a grandmother Cherokee, and surrounded by crystals, and her, giving me beautiful guidance. And I put myself into a lot of situations I just felt like this need to know what's out there, and also explore some of those things that I was feeling that, didn't necessarily make sense in the physical world, but made sense in this etheric world. And that's sort of where after the loss, I was operating more from there. I was maybe tapped in more to that world, or feeling, that lack of presence. So I'd say, like, I would have these dreams where I would, let's say, go into my mom's house, and my parents were divorced, so we sold my mom's house with a few months after she passed. But having dreams about going into her house, and it was dark, and I could be in the house, but not her presence not being there was almost like nightmarish.
Oh, yeah.
And how do I navigate that? Or how do you go into spaces where it's like, I know this, in this time and place, this is where my mother would be. And being there without her, or being there with my father, it's just those things trigger, or there's almost like a beauty to knowing that they would be here at this time, or a beauty to knowing that, had they still been around, this is what we would be doing together, or this is what they'd be enjoying. And sometimes it's hard to not get caught up in the past.
Yeah.
Too.
Yep. Absolutely.
But I think we owe it to ourselves to be in the present moment, and to continue living, and to do what we need to do to work through pain, and to honor grief, and to sit with it. And, everybody is different. I just don't think there's any one path forward, but I think people need to be really patient with themselves, and patient with their loved ones, and take a deep breath, and take a step back, and say, if I'm not feeling okay, I'm just not feeling okay. Or if this makes me sad, this makes me sad. And being able to honor that, I have an older brother, and we grieve very differently. And that was fine. And I think at some point I was like, Ben, like, you're so not emotional. But he would express it in other ways. And I even went and we did a constellation healing.
I've heard about this. Someone was just talking about it yesterday, actually. So tell me a little bit about that.
So the one that we did, normally you're there in person, but the one that we did, it was a whole bunch of people in Portland, Oregon, were acting out my family dynamics.
That's so weird. It seems so weird.
I'm like, I don't know.
It's just such an odd construct, but it's fascinating.
Right. But
go on,
But they have a group of people in the room, and they sort of intuit the family, and you're asked a couple questions beforehand. And I called my brother, and I was like, Ben, there's like 10 people in Portland, Oregon who are acting out our family right now. And he was like, you're nuts, but okay. But okay, like tell me what happened. Like, tell me the end result. Tell me what happened. But it was interesting because they said at the time, the group felt that there were 2 boys, like maybe nephews. And at that point in time, my brother had just had one child. He now has 2 boys. And they had somebody come in and play my sister-in-law. And they rearranged the family dynamic. So things will come up where, they'll be like, we feel your mother is turned away and your brother is facing your mother, and the group realigns itself to sort of readjust the energy. And I'm sure it's way more complex than this, but this is what
this is fine
got
for
out
me.
of it. Yeah.
This is level 1.
So they readjusted the group to sort of heal some of those dynamics, whether it's immediate dynamics or my brother feeling, what came up was my brother feeling guilty about not spending enough time with my mother before, because he was 24 when she passed, so, and living in Boston, but feeling bad about not being there enough. And they said, no, it's fine. Like, she was fine with it, and I knew she was fine with it.
You need to hear that, though.
I needed to hear.
When someone dies suddenly, you dwell on the last bad thing that happened, or that what if you get into an argument the last time you see somebody? I mean, it doesn't, it's so hard to get over those things.
It is. And it was interesting too, because she said, you're such a director, but you need to step back and let your brother do his thing.
You're such a director.
You need to learn from him. Yes. So I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And I did step back, and I when I stepped back, I almost not forgave him, but had more understanding for him. And he's one of my best friends now.
That's good.
But it was really like I had to back off.
Yeah. So who are these people who are the actors, players in the
They're
family?
normal people that come in and join the group.
It's such a unusual construct.
Yeah.
Of all the energy healings that you did, what did you feel was the most helpful?
I don't know if there was one thing in particular, but I think like a series of things. I did go to a Prana healer once. I found that really helpful. I had the grandmother that I worked with.
Yeah.
That was absolutely profound. I think I fell asleep on her couch covered in crystals. I mean, it was just, she was such a firecracker. She was 80 years old. I happened to see her on her 80th birthday. And just
Amazing.
the vivaciousness of this woman at 80, it was like there was so much to live into. There was so much to move forward into. And, she had a lot of tragedy in her life. And just her level of energy and her level of clarity and her level of understanding and compassion, it was so beautiful that I was so inspired by her. And I was like, she is a sexy 80. And I want to be that sexy 80 with her. And she told me to eat elk, which I normally don't like game. She said it had real spiritual value for me. And I don't eat meat too often, but when I have an opportunity to have elk, I have it. And I really feel like I eat it with like reverence and gratitude, but I feel like this whole clearing sense when I do have it. So she was really profound, and, had a couple experiences with other healers, and, there was a gentleman in New York in particular who I worked with who works with your central nervous system to get you out of fight or flight. And that was one of those things where
we all need that.
Yes,
I mean,
just living in New York.
No, absolutely. And from COVID, I feel like so many people are just haven't left that mode, and that's where a lot of this anger comes from, and conflict, and people are so amped up.
Yeah,
and they're just ready to fight.
Agree.
And or flight, either way, doesn't matter. So what did that look like? Sounds interesting.
That was it was quiet and peaceful, and I was thinking, what did I spend my money on? It wasn't very expensive, but I was lying down on a table, and just like a massage table, and it was just very light energy work, not even physically touching my body. And I did a few sessions, and all of a sudden I was walking on the street, and I realized like I'm breathing. I'm not, my shoulders are relaxed. I feel good. I don't feel like, I just don't feel tense anymore.
You're not like holding on for
I'm
dear
not
life.
holding on.
Yeah.
But to your point, the world is crazy right now. It's really crazy. And I think COVID especially put everybody in fight or flight.
Yeah.
The level of anxiety, and people aren't used to dealing with stressors that are that strong.
Yeah, and
that
profound effects on families, family systems, healthcare system. We didn't talk about your husband's death.
Sure.
And thank you for talking about all this. I mean, it's not easy, but would you just share with me sort of what happened and then how that affected you?
Yeah. So my husband and I were together for 10 years, and he was a well-known integrative doctor here in Manhattan, had a radio show on WBC and WOR for years. So he was really beloved, and just kind of a New York staple, that New York swagger. And he
was kind of a larger-than-life figure, wasn't he?
He was.
Yeah.
He had a huge personality, and I felt really just blessed to be able to, that we loved each other so much. And he had such a great attitude of just, no matter what life brings you, make the best of it, and how to take, really make the best of any situation. So whether it was a bad experience or great experience, he was always looking at the world of how you can make it better, and how you can make it happier, and how you can create whatever you want to occur. So he was just
So he was a manifestor.
absolute manifestor, from parking spaces to
Oh, that's my specialty.
I know you guys would like each other.
I'm not good at other stuff, but I can find a parking spot like nobody's business.
Amazing.
Yeah, my life is in shambles, but I got the parking down.
space right in front. He was like that too. So when we opened it, we had a center in Sag Harbor that we opened. We were in from 2010 to 2013. It was supposed to be a pop shop for one summer.
Oh, wow.
But I went to sign a lease somewhere and the guy didn't show up. And my husband, we got in the car and he goes, "Don't be upset." And he said, "Let the spirit guide you." And 20 seconds later, there was a for rent sign on another building that hadn't been there when we were driving down. He walked right in, got the owner's phone number, and the next day we had a lease sign.
Amazing.
So he was like such a doer, such a manifestor. But he passed away unexpectedly on Christmas Day in 2015.
Oh.
And it was, he was having just a routine medical procedure. And sort of everything that he said about being in a hospital environment happened, what to look out for. It was sort of a worst case scenario of anything that possibly could have gone wrong, went wrong. And it was shocking. I thought we'd be going home that afternoon, and I was called to the, I was in the recovery room and waiting to get brought into the recovery room, and somebody came down and said, we'll be there and you'll be in recovery in 20 minutes. Everything was great. And then 40 minutes went by and I said, "This is kind of weird." And the administrator called up, and eventually the surgeon came down and said, "Your husband's on life support and we don't know if he's going to make it. And I'm so sorry." And at that moment I heard somebody crashing, and there was a call, somebody was crashing in the ICU, and I knew it was my husband. So I ran upstairs, and he was in a room surrounded with people, and somebody walked out not knowing who I was and said, "We don't have a pulse." And I just said, "Go back in there and get a pulse." And they did. And it was a sort of slow-moving train wreck. I mean, I'm not so familiar with hospital settings. I don't know the logistics of a lot of that stuff. I was thinking, like, if Rich could just tell me what to do in this scenario, like,
fix this.
I could fix this. Long story short, I was able to get him conscious. Was able to have a few last communications with him where he could shake his head yes or no. And, I said, this is one of the IV bags, and he would be like, "Nope." And I'd be like, "Okay." Or "This is what," and we'd sort of play a guessing game of, "You want to know about the dogs?" And it was, yes. And I just said, "Rich, like, when we get home, we're going to have a lot to talk about." And, he never made it, and he passed on Christmas morning. I felt like it was, there was a lot of organ damage and not enough time, and how it is. They're really delicate situations, but everybody, I think, did their best, and sometimes you get caught up in liability versus what you're actually able to do, and who knows what the outcome could have been. You can never say, but
I've forgotten that he had died.
Yeah.
I've forgotten how he had died, but he died exactly how my father died.
Well, yeah.
So my father had a routine medical procedure, and he one thing went wrong after another, and 5 days later he was dead.
Yeah.
And he never really woke up. And it was same thing. He was coding just like Rich was, and they lost a pulse, and I was on the phone, and I said, "Do CPR and keep him going until we get there." And it's just, again, liability. We didn't really care. There were so many things that went wrong. It's like this cascade of things. And as soon as one organ gets hit, then the next one fails, and the train is left the station, and there's no getting it back. And you can just see it, and you almost don't have to understand the medical system. It's something you viscerally feel. And my mother, who is not in medicine, was with him basically, as much as she could be, and just knew that it was spiraling without even knowing any of the facts. And I knew it was spiraling because I knew his kidneys were failing, he wasn't making urine, etc. But I'd forgotten that those experiences were so deadly similar.
I'm so sorry for your loss. It's so weird to see a loved one that's incapacitated, especially somebody who's so knowledgeable.
Yeah.
And so it was like, I can't believe it's slow moving train wreck is happening,
Yeah.
because it was everything Rich said about look out for this or that. Or I even remember sitting with him going through the checklist of stuff, and he'd be like, don't give me that medication, don't do this, da 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 da. Like, just very direct. He knew what he wanted, he knew what he didn't wanted, and it was just, I mean, you can't make this up.
No.
So
And it's, you could have never
Yeah.
imagined it and foreseen it. I mean, I'm sure, you weren't worried about it.
No.
It's routine. We weren't worried about it.
Yeah.
And then there it is. And it's just, this huge gaping hole in your life.
Yeah.
So then what happened?
So it was, I mean, shocking. I think I hadn't slept for a few days. And, I just remember signing, getting the debt, sitting there signing the paperwork and going back to our apartment and in such disbelief that he would never be there again.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I would say this, that first night when you lose somebody, there is this just void of emptiness where
Yeah.
you smell their clothes. You
I feel
cannot believe, like the night is so immense, and that you
Immense.
cannot believe that the rest of your life will go on without them.
Yeah.
It is the just guttural feeling of anyone who's lost anyone, I'm sure, experienced that. But that first night, you just cannot believe that that the rest of your life will continue without that person.
Yeah. It's unfathomable.
It's unfathomable. And he had such a big life and such a big life, a
He
big
touched
business.
So many people.
So
Yeah.
it was also sort of, we had 18 employees, and I didn't want to tell them on Christmas that what had happened. So the next day I called and, had conversations, and they had worked for him for, 20, 30 years, some of them. So it was really like a tight-knit family.
Yeah.
And it was so hard, and I felt I had it, and patients were calling me too, and the word was slowly getting out. His agent from the radio station called and said, somebody, an Integrative website had published this. Is this true? And I said yes, and I just haven't got a chance to tell you yet. And everybody was really supportive. To an extent, because it's also, there was a lot of fear around what's
Sure.
happening to our livelihoods or what's happening in general, where people just wanted to know what happened. So it was really hard to space when you were with somebody who was a public figure who passed unexpectedly, space to grieve, and people also, wanted things to continue as is,
Yeah.
and they just couldn't. And it was hard to let people down. But Rich had a big world, and he was the nucleus of it. And it was hard for people to and myself included, figure out who we were without him.
Oh, I feel you on that.
Yeah.
You must have had that to some degree with your parents, because
Yeah.
you're so connected to this person and so much see yourself through their eyes in a way.
Yeah.
And they are, in my case, my father was sort of the center of our community.
Yeah.
He was the center of our family, our extended family, and the community. So losing that, it's really like losing a piece
Yeah.
of yourself, and you can't. There were so many incidences where it's almost like we couldn't figure out how to navigate it, and there were little things like, what are we going to do on Halloween? Because he always used to dress up as the mad doctor and terrorize the children in the neighborhood.
Amazing.
Like, is someone going to do that? Or,
I hope somebody's doing that.
Yeah. So for a while, my mother and I did it, but it was like,
It's not the same.
it was
Yeah.
it was like a Woody Allen movie. Felt tough. And then other things like, my mom had no idea where the money was. Like, how are we going to pay the bills? And and I'm sure in your case with the business and all the employees and your partnership in so many arenas, it must have been like a web to untangle.
Yeah, and I'm not a doctor or a practitioner.
Right.
I couldn't run a medical center. I could for 6 months and then transition it to another doctor. But it was really hard to figure out how to continue the business.
Yeah.
And I had hundreds of patients saying, you can't close this place. Where do we go? What do we do? And so there was a huge responsibility of me being able to take time for myself, which didn't really happen. But I felt it was easier for me to focus on other people and just put my blinders on and let's triage the business. So he passed Christmas, and we had patients. We had months, like 4 months booked out of patients straight starting January 4th. And it was, by January 4th, I had a doctor in place.
Holy moly.
And it was like just operating, going on an autopilot in a sense, just to be able to continue
Give service, yeah.
and give service. And, I figured even if the doctor wasn't perfect, the nurses and
the system
was in place.
For sure.
So whoever stepped in would be stepping into a
really
well-oiled
place,
system.
yeah.
Everybody gave their best, and obviously it wasn't the same. And at some point we had to sell the practice and transition it over. But it was my husband had such a big life and lived in such a big world, and I was so blessed to be a part of it, and we were all blessed to be a part of it. And I think one of the things about his energy that I loved is that he was so accepting of everybody, whoever they were, that people felt very comfortable around them as themselves. And I think when you have somebody who has that energy, it's almost more unnerving when you lose them, because it's like, who's gonna accept me? And I just had like a whole group of people that I'm like, okay, like I'll take care of you as best as I can. But things just had to change.
Yeah.
And so it was hard, and it was years, and still in some cases it's been 8 years, but still unraveling.
8 years is not that long.
No.
I mean, my father's been dead now 22 years, and it feels like yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, I still think of him constantly, as I'm sure you do. And
Every day,
there's
right?
so many, you were so integrated with him and the practice. So then you took part of it, though, and still run that.
So I'd sold the practice, and in 2019, a woman, my business partner, Juhi, and her business partner, Neil, who's the chairman of our board, Neil Shenoy, came to me and said, what did you do with the practice? What did you do with the vitamin company? And I said, I sold it. And Neil said one of the last times he felt great was when he was on my husband's protocol. And
wow.
Juhi was so close to Rich.
Yeah.
She was like a daughter to him. And, we said, okay, like, is there something we can do together? And there was an opportunity to buy back the practice, and there was an opportunity to buy back the vitamin company.
That was so lucky.
It was...
It's serendipitous, right?
Well, there's things that are out of our control that are working in our favor, and here's something that I felt like we had to move forward with. And I thought about it, and I was able to help broker that deal to reacquire the businesses. And came on as a board member and investor, and then in 2021 was asked to be the CEO of the company. So it was Juhi, her practice, her thought leadership, Pure Essentials, the supplement company. And,
I know it well.
Yes.
I distribute it.
Yeah. Which Alexis is a distributor.
Yes. Downstairs, I got my vitamin C.
Yeah. I mean,
into my ginger shot.
And it's something...
it's amazing products.
Yeah.
So that must have felt really nice reclaiming that. I mean, it's almost like getting a part of Richard back.
Well, it was really interesting. Like Rich and I had a conversation. We had such a great relationship. There was like nothing off the table we wouldn't talk about, and we both sort of have like sixth sense of humors. And he said
sixth sense, not
both.
Sixth sense.
Yeah, sick and sixth. But like I would joke around and say if I die, like, do this, and if he'd be like, if I die, do that, but like, teasing each other about like who to date or not date or whatever, but not actually thinking that. And he said to me once, like, if I die, he goes, you can close the practice. You're not a doctor. He goes, but run with a vitamin company. He goes, you would do well with that. Aww. And I was always like, okay, but truthfully, he'd also say, do whatever you want, like just be happy. And again, like the theme of just be happy.
Reverberating from your mom.
Right. Do whatever you want. Just be happy. And so there was something that felt full circle when Neil and Juhi came to me, because they were people that Rich loved.
Yep.
And I said, they're back in my life for a reason, and this opportunity is happening for a reason. Let me say yes to this, and we'll see where this goes. And, we came on board, and I came on board, and, Juhi had a massive medical incident over COVID, which Alexis you were integral in saving her life. And I know she's spoken about her story, and it's her story to tell. She's
gonna come and we're gonna talk about it.
Yeah.
It was so intense and it was so unexpected,
Yeah.
and she got so sick so quickly.
Yeah.
And you know better than anybody.
Yeah.
We really almost lost her.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
she was sort of going away from us, and a lot of people put in a lot of energy
Yeah.
and effort, and brilliant doctors at NYU
Yes.
helped her, and now she's fine.
And she's
totally
fine.
No
Yeah.
deficits. I mean, she looks great.
She's thriving.
Yeah.
She's and she's an inspiration with
Yeah.
what she went through, and thanks to you. And I remember, I think
Thank
you were
you.
when her mother called me. I think you were the first phone call, and you just made magic happen.
She needed
Yeah.
to get where she went.
Yeah.
And fortunately, it happened fast enough.
Yeah.
But boy,
Yeah.
that was a scary time.
It was a scary, yeah. And
It's hard to even conjure that back, fortunately, because
Right.
it's hard to think about.
yeah,
But
it was-
and that was then that all had morphed into a practice.
yeah, and it was another sort of platform of resilience and moving forward. And okay, like you've got a plate, a full plate you've got to deal with, making sure my business partner was okay. I had just come in to steward this business, and then we've got to pivot immediately.
Yeah.
COVID was happening, my partner was sick, and you just have to make decisions and remove emotion from it a little bit to be able to
Yeah, otherwise you get stuck, and you
to
can be
pivot.
stuck for forever.
Yeah. So that was a huge lesson too of, when things aren't going well, change them. Don't sit in something too long, or have the fortitude to know we've got to pivot and be open to pivoting. And that's what we did. And we, closed the business, and it was bittersweet.
Yeah.
But something about that energy needed to clear, and I might not have realized it at that time. But it's, as people say, like sometimes when decisions are made, it doesn't seem like a gift in the moment, but what comes after is the gift that you weren't expecting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they say you have to close one door to be able to open
Exactly.
another, and I think
Yeah.
that's really true.
Yeah.
And then you became very involved in this incredible project called
Yeah.
Documenting Hope,
Yeah.
which I'll let you describe, but I just want to start off with saying there's so many toxins, problematic energies, influences,
Yes.
poorly made things
Yeah.
in terms of food, medicines, and we really have to protect ourselves, and it's incredibly important to figure out ways of doing that. And so with that as backdrop, tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
Documenting Hope.
So it was actually, Rich was on their medical advisory board for years.
Oh, I didn't realize
And
that.
that's how I was introduced to the
okay.
organization. And then they pulled me in on their, I'm not a doctor, but I was sort of with Rich since we were business partners too on the medical.
Dr. Adjacent.
Yeah, Dr. Jason, the medical advisory board with Rich. And after he passed, they asked me if I'd like to join their regular board. And I'm now the chairman of their board. I've been for the last 5 years. But they have 2 IRB approved studies focused on cumulative toxic load. And when you remove cumulative toxic load, you can many times reverse health outcomes. And it's focused on children. It's exactly the way that Rich practiced, exactly the way that a lot of functional medicine doctors practice and practitioners, evaluate people.
So I just have to interrupt because the IRB thing, people don't realize like how important that
Yeah.
is. I'm one of the chairmen of the board of the IRB
Oh, wow.
review committee at NYU, and
Amazing.
have been for a million
I
years.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so
So you
I
understand.
review human subjects research and have done this for a long time. It's a lot of work to do it, but it's so important that studies, and especially in children, that we're doing things that are creative,
Yeah.
but that they are rigorous scientifically. And so having an IRB approved study that's kind of interesting and different, and it's not a standard randomized controlled drug
Right.
study, is very, very important, because we really need to look at these alternative modalities and treatments as rigorously as we look at a medication, because
Exactly.
Otherwise it's just fluff and, oh yes, then maybe they felt better, but
Yeah.
this will actually show that or not. So I applaud the whole project because of that, and
for our listeners, it's really important that that be the backdrop of it. So tell me about what the work does.
So right now, what I love about it is that they are creating science for things that we've known in integrative medicine and functional medicine practices anecdotally for years. And they're running 18 children, as the first group through a whole system of healing modalities. And what's interesting about this and about being able to get that IRB approval is it is a multifactorial study. So as you know, a lot of times, people do studies and it's like, let's look at this plant and give it water, oxygen, sunlight, and you remove water and oxygen, and you just give the plant sunlight, and the conclusion of the study is sunlight kills plants. But we know a lot of studies are done that way, but really we are complex systems, we're complex organisms, and everything from our environment, foods that we eat, chemicals that we might use in our household, energy, neonatal stressors. There's all different types of things that can affect children and affect health outcomes in kids. So they are looking at these children from with a whole host of chronic illnesses from all different angles. So they are completely evaluating all of their bioterrains, their environment. There is an extensive study called the Chirp Study. People can go online and do their own Chirp Study and be part of the program. If you go on documentinghope.com, you're able to participate. At least doing the study, but there's a whole list of factors, because everything that's in our environment we are affected by, and even if it's negligible. Mm-hmm. So it's really finding what are the offending factors that are affecting these children, and then removing the offending factors and helping their bodies repair and rebuild and detoxify, so that now they can be in a world where these stressors aren't creating chronic illness.
My God, it's so fascinating, and I think it's going to be, the findings are going to be so important. Yeah. I can't wait to hear about it.
I don't think I can talk about it yet, but I've gotten some snapshots of the aggregated data, and it's so fascinating and it's mind-blowing, and they're getting wonderful results and really dramatic results with the children that they're working with. And the goal is they're going to have a membership site, or they've actually already launched a membership site on their platform, where now parents either of affected children or just wanting to keep your children healthy will have a guide to what to do when faced with some of these issues, or some of the avenues where you can look at and have you evaluated from this angle, or try this out, or these things in conjunction people get really great results with. And really having a forum for parents and families to help recover their kids, or at least not everybody's necessarily recoverable, but wherever they can help give their children a better quality of life. We have one of our board members who's a physician in Westport, Connecticut, recovered her child who had some issues, and he just graduated Brown University with a PhD in chemical engineering.
Oh, so he's not very smart.
No, not very smart. But,
it's amazing.
But he was somebody who I believe at one point was nonverbal. So
wow.
Yeah.
It is such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so
Alexis,
much.
Yeah.
You're like a bright, shining light in this world, and I'm so grateful to have met you and have you a part of my life.
Thank
you so much.
And I love you dearly and feel the same way about you, and just wish you all the best in this podcast and everything that you do, and love being able to work with you.
Thank you.
So thank you.
I love you.
Love you.
Oh.
This was awesome.
God.
Do you think it went all right?
You are unbelievable.